Okay, we are back. We're back again. And today we are back with Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. So, this book freaking slapped. Let's just start there. Really enjoyed. This was a good book. This was a good book. This book was 4.5 out of 5 stars, my opinion. So, I read this book in 2 days. I finished my last book on Thursday and started this book that day. It's now Saturday morning. Maybe not morning anymore, but it's Saturday. So I finished this in like a day and a half because I wanted to. Because this book pulled me to finish it in a day and a half. So it was kept my interest. So what is this even about? What are we talking about? This book follows a woman, a 26-year-old woman named Kenna, and she arrives in this town in search of something with some intention. And we find out that she's just gotten out of prison recently. She was like in transitional housing for a little bit, but she basically just got out of prison she was in prison for 5 years, and she initially went to prison for more details come throughout, but from what we kind of know is that she was in prison because she was involved in the death of her boyfriend at the time. His name was Scotty, in some type of car accident that she was somehow part of. And so she went to trial and pled guilty, and she went to prison for this. And while she's in prison, she finds out that she's pregnant shortly after, like it's Scotty's kid. So shortly after she gets into prison, she finds out she's pregnant. She's like, whoa, and gives birth. And as a result, since she can't raise the kid in prison, the daughter, it's a daughter, ends up with Scotty's parents. So Scotty's dead. They have a daughter named Diem that Kenna names Diem. And Diem ends up with Scotty's parents, Grace and Patrick, so Diem's grandparents. So Diem is in prison for 5 years, and what we know is she like just wants to be in Diem's life. That's like her goal. That's like her one thing that she's clinging on to. That's at least the vibe we kind of get. And when she gets out of prison, her intention is to find some type of way into Diem's life, in like a good, heartfelt, like wanting to be a part of my daughter's life as her mother type of way. And that's kind of what we're given. And we're also given that Grace and Patrick are not likely to take it well. Like, she's very nervous that it's not going to go well. She's hopeful that, like, oh, maybe it'll go well, but we kind of find out it doesn't. Like, it's not headed that way. So another really, really important character added into this little concoction we got going on that's already crazy enough is there's this guy, Ledger, who is somehow very involved in this whole dynamic. And we don't know exactly how, but the very beginning of the book starts off with Kenna walking into a bar, and I believe that's like the first scene. Kenna walks into a bar, and there's this guy behind the bar, and we find out later that that's Ledger, and somehow their lives become very intertwined. And this book is a dual point of view. So Kenna, Ledger, every other chapter. So I like that. That's always fun. And this book, I thought was a romance. Like, I kind of thought it was a romance at the beginning, but I found out it's really not. I mean, it is. It is a romance. There's romance that goes on in this book, but this is a heavy, just like controversial situation. The reader sees both sides of the story and just takes you for a freaking roller coaster ride of like, whoa. So that's the beginning. That's like the setup of this story, and you just kind of go for it. That's really all you're given. You don't really like, that she's there to see her daughter and be involved in her life, but you're like, what? You don't know really where this is gonna go. So I loved this book, which I said, and I thought it was really good. And there were two things that I totally loved about this. One was that Colleen Hoover forced you to see both sides. If she forced you in the best way as a writer as the reader to see both sides and just be like, whoa, I get it. I get why you feel that way. I also get why you feel that way. And I understand that you think this is the best way, and I can understand why the other person might disagree, but you're still making valid points, but they're making, and it's just not black and white. It's 100% not black and white. No situation is, and this really just puts it, this wonderful book, puts it in your face, in a hardcore way that kind of makes you face the truth, your own truths or whatever. And so that was amazing. The other thing I really liked about this book was that it was not predictable, and they're closely related. Like, since both sides were so valid and that's how they read, it just made you feel like, and they were on such opposing sides. Like, Kenna wants to be a part of Diem's life so badly, and Grace and Patrick are like, you're completely a lunatic if you think that's happening. You're having no part in our life. And they're like, you took away our son, Scotty, and now you're trying to take away Diem from us too. Like, you're not doing that. And she's like, I really just want to be with my daughter. Like, that was one mistake, like one night. And that's the situation. It's like, should one night determine the rest of your life? And a lot of times in really shitty situations, just in general, it does for a lot of people. And that's just kind of life and the way things work out. And in this case, that's like kind of what's being proposed. Like, to what extent does one thing affect the other? And it's pretty crazy. So anyway, it is very unpredictable, which I loved. That's something that I love when I read books, is like, if I really don't know where this is going and it's a good story, like, I'm in it to the end. And I loved that. And that's what pulled me in so aggressively, because both sides just really convinced you that they weren't going to change and this was it for them. And anyway, just wild, a wild ride entirely. So anyway, I loved that part of the book. I loved, there was also this other character named Lady Diana, who she just brought humor, like a little bit of lighthearted humor mixed in, because you need that sometimes when a book is this heavy, because this is a really heavy book. And I appreciated that. So she was a light within this book. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to give you too much more before I go into spoilers, just because I mean, maybe trigger warnings, I don't know. So death, but like, you already know that that's a part of the situation. And that's what's kind of crazy about this book, is like, it's really sad. I mean, you're kind of starting off from a very sad place. This guy is dead. She's been in prison. Her daughter is 0% a part of her life when she wants to be in her, Kenna wants Diem to be in her life. And it's kind of like, that's not going to change. Like, the death of Scotty is not changing. And you're just kind of dealing with it throughout the entirety of this book, saying, all right, well, can we make the situation any better? And that's what she's doing. She has like nothing to live for kind of at this point, or what she was living for was this daughter. And anyway, crazy book. Just really, really pulls you in and makes you see both sides and understand why both are valid. So I'm going to go into spoilers next, but I do just want to say that I do give this 4.5 stars. For me, it was really good. And I also just want to say, I don't know, like, there was romance within this book, and that was relevant and important, but I almost felt that, in some ways it might have pulled away from some of the meaning. And I felt like the romance that happened could have been just as valuable, and what came out of that romance could have been just as valuable if it came out of a friendship. Like, because what was built was basically a friendship, and then there was romance on top of that. But or maybe, I don't know, maybe that's not even necessarily what it was, but I just feel that it didn't need to be romance. And I don't want to say too much, but I'm just saying this was a really good book, and there was romance in it. The romance was good, but once you read it, you may feel like, oh, maybe friendship could have also been an option. Just kind of up to your own opinion. So, pause. Okay, now spoilers. I just want to say, yes, she did force both perspectives, like, really aggressively, but I don't know if I'm the only reader that felt, I mean, I know I'm not, so I'm the only reader that felt this way, but I felt that Kenna had this action where she was very heavily involved in Scotty's death, and they also had a child. So two very different, not very different, but they're separate things in my opinion. And so Kenna was involved in Scotty's death, and yes, her actions did result in, and honestly though, her actions and Scotty's actions, like, let's just make that point, they were both intoxicated. And yes, Kenna may have been less intoxicated, so some might say, like, well, therefore she's more responsible for making the decision that they shouldn't have been driving. But no, they're both consciously walking into a car willingly together. So anything that happens after you enter a car with somebody that you know is intoxicated, and somebody that the person behind the wheel is intoxicated, I'm just saying, anything can happen. And at that point, I'm not saying that it's any one in particular person's fault that ends up injured within that car who willingly chose to get into that car. I just want to put that out there, and that's how I feel. But anyway, the fact that Scotty died is one thing, and the fact that they had a daughter together is another thing. And I completely understand if Grace and Patrick are like, well, he's our son, and since this happened, you need to pay for it. I don't know. There was this one line that kind of stood out to me. It says, Kenna being a part of Diem's life is a privilege, and Kenna lost that privilege the night she decided her freedom was worth more than Scotty's life. And that's really heavy, and I get the point of, like, the perspective that's trying to be, like, put in your face, but I just feel that the privilege of being a part of Diem's life should not be directly connected. It shouldn't be directly connected to Scotty's, like, to the fact that Scotty no longer was able to live. Like, they're not, and she didn't do it knowing that Diem was there. It wasn't like, I'm gonna kill Scotty knowing that this could affect how Diem, I don't even know exists yet, you know, like, how it may impact how I can be a part of my future daughter's life that I don't know exists yet. So that was a little tough for me. And I felt like they hung on so aggressively to that. Like, well, you took Scotty, so we're keeping Diem. And like, Diem is not a pawn. So, and I know they, of course, didn't mean it that way, but it started to feel that way because they were using her as a factor of like on a chessboard. And I don't know. It just, that was tough for me. One of the other things was that I was kind of surprised by how quickly, or not quickly, or easily, they flipped. Like, at the end, I mean, like I said, this was a really unpredictable book, and it was so unpredictable because I felt like both sides were so incredibly steadfast on their positions. Like, Kenna was there to get in Diem's life, and that was her intention, and she was going to make it happen because she cared, and she was there, and she really cared to be a part of her life as this new mother, or this mother that first time being potentially in her daughter's life. And then there was Grace and Patrick, and they were so steadfast on like, there's not a chance, you took Scotty from us, like, this is it, please leave. And then they put a restraining order on her, like, when I don't think that should have happened, because side note, Ledger knew that Kenna worked there. He should have let Grace know in advance if he was going to pull something like that traumatizing, potentially for both Diem and Kenna, to put them in that situation. If he knew that would be how he would handle it if the situation came up, I'm talking about in the grocery store parking lot, then he should have been telling Grace, like, hey, I just found out Kenna works here, don't go there, because of course I know you don't want Diem in her life, or her and Diem's life. So that was just a little bit weird. But all I'm just saying is that Grace and Patrick were so steadfast on their position. So the fact that it took one letter to completely flip a switch, and for them to be like, oh, I forgive you, you forgive me, like, I know it's been 5 years, and like, it just took this one letter, and it's like, I don't know, just to me as a reader, I'm just like, so you didn't, throughout those entire 5 years, you just hung on to the fact that you thought that she was unremorseful and said, therefore, that's it? Like, I don't know, it seemed like too quick for me, because they were so aggressively, like, it was like, my opinion, the entire book, and then it was one thing switched, and then it was like, oh, this is now I'm completely, I don't know. That was a little bit weird. So maybe that was part of why I changed it wasn't like a 5-star. But anyway, it was really good. I think the other thing that affected that was the fact that I felt that romance between Ledger and Kenna could have potentially been a friendship, because the things that could have come out of that dynamic just in of itself could have come from a friendship and didn't need to come from a romance. Because just reading how Kenna felt about Scotty, I was like rooting for Kenna and Scotty. I was like, you guys could have had a life together. And I know it's just the first 6 months of the relationship, and of course that's how you're supposed to feel, but it was a little bit weird, like, and now she ends up with his best friend. I don't know. A little funky. But the romance was great, and don't get me wrong, again, spiciness was great, but that was just a side note for me. Anyway, all in all, I do think it was a really good book. That's my dog. I think it was a great book, and I do feel it was 4.5 stars. I do recommend it. So that's how I feel. I don't know what I'm going to read next, but I hope you enjoyed listening, and thank you.